Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Piyush and this is video number 6 in the series CK 2024. So a lot of people have reached out to me and asked me this question that which cloud provider will be using for this entire CK series? And my answer to that is none of them. Because there is a process of learning, there is a process of doing the prerequisites and then move ahead with the main topic. For example, before learning Kubernetes, we learned Docker and containers, all the fundamentals. Now, before learning the managed Kubernetes service such as AKS, EKS, or GKE, before learning that, we need to learn the Kubernetes itself on the local installation. This is what will give you the maximum learning, maximum hands on, and you will be able to practice all the concepts by yourself. If you go ahead with any of the managed service, you know, you won't even get access to the control plane node and you won't be able to troubleshoot any of the scenarios. And there is very minimum learning because most of the part is already managed by the cloud provider itself. I hope I'm getting somewhere. I hope you are able to understand what I'm trying to say. So we'll be installing Kubernetes on a local system, right? And we'll be doing that with the help of kind cluster. So there are different ways you can install Kubernetes on your local machine. You can go ahead with Minikube, K3s, K3D, kind, and there could be many other as well. So kind is Kubernetes in Docker, which is one of the most popular local installation of Kubernetes. So this is what we'll be doing in this video. We'll be doing the installation. We'll basically set our cluster for the hands-on that we can do throughout this entire series. And we'll also be looking at some of the important things from the exam perspective. So without any further ado, let's start with the video. All right, so as I've mentioned, we'll be using kind for the local Kubernetes installation. And this is the page or the reference article that we can follow. I'll provide the link in the description and in the GitHub repository. So don't worry about that. And as it says, it's a tool that is used to run local Kubernetes cluster using Docker container nodes. That means what it will do on the backend for you, it will spin up some Docker containers, and each of these Docker containers will be treated as a separate node so that you can use those nodes as control plane and worker nodes, right? So this is pretty neat and it is easier to set up. So don't worry, we'll see that everything in detail. And I will also install that along with this particular video. So the prerequisite is you should have Go 1.16 installed in your system and either of these things, Docker, Podman, nerdctl. Right? If you have, you can follow along these commands. I already have Docker installed in my system, which we did as part of one of the previous videos as the prerequisite. So if you have followed that and if you already have Docker installed, what you can do is you can go to quick start guide from this page. Let's go over here. And the first table of contents shows that it has different installation methods. You can install it with the package manager, you can install it from the release binaries, or you can install it from the source itself, right? So you can choose whatever is convenient for you. We'll go with the first option, which is installing with the package manager. And it has different instructions for each of the environments. Like if you are on Mac, you can use brew install kind. If you are on Windows, you can install using Choco install kind. This particular command, Chocolate, is a Windows package manager that helps you install software, packages, and so on. Or you can install it from the release binaries. And here are the instructions for Linux and for Mac OS, for Windows, and so on. Then you have installation from source. So feel free to choose whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm on Mac, so I'm gonna go ahead with this installation, brew install kind. So on the left side is my Mac terminal window. So I'm gonna enter brew install kind. Okay. And it will download the package, it will install it. So it is done. As simple as that, right? I'm gonna clear the screen. Now we have installed the kind binary. Now the next part is to create the cluster. Okay, so scroll down to the section where it says creating a cluster. It says creating a Kubernetes cluster is as simple as kind create cluster. So this is the command that you can run. Now it has some optional flag which says to specify another image, use hyphen image, else it will be created with the latest Kubernetes image. And you can also specify the name of the cluster. Okay, so I'm just gonna type kind create cluster hyphen image. As of today, like I'm recording this video in May. So as of May 2024, 1.29 is the version that is available in all of the CKA exams, right? So this is the version that I will be installing. If you, let's say, if you are watching this video 2 months afterward in July or August somewhere or anytime after that, there could be another version running in CKA labs, right? So make sure you go to the CNCF exam guide and see which version of Kubernetes they are using. It doesn't matter most of the times because there is very minute changes when it comes to CK exam between the versions, but it is advisable to use the version that is as similar to the exam version, right? So for now, I'm going to use 1.29. So for that, if you read these lines over here, right? It says if you need to run a specific version of Kubernetes, you can check out the release notes over here. Okay, so I'm gonna open this in a new tab. Okay, and it says the latest version is 1.30. That is what it will be using if I don't specify any version, right? And if we scroll down and here it says images pre-built for this release. What I need is 1.29. So I'm going to copy this particular line. So it has the repository details. So this is a Kubernetes image, which is based on a node image, and it has 1.29.4 version with a particular SHA ID, right? So I'm just going to copy this and I'm go back to this particular terminal window and I'll paste this as the image name. Okay. Now the next parameter that we can pass is name of the cluster. If we leave it default, if we don't specify any name, it will create the cluster with the name kind. So I'm gonna write hyphen name and then we'll give it a name CKA cluster 1, right? And hit enter. Okay. Now, let's say it is now pulling the node image, which is on this repository kindest node 1.29.4, and it is preparing the nodes, writing configuration, starting control plane, all the functions that it is doing. We have already seen the control plane, what it is. So it will have all the different control plane components, your API server, your scheduler, controller manager, etcd, and so on. So now it said it has been created. And now the next part is you need to check if it is working fine or not, right? It is also sending this message like kubectl cluster info context kind ck cluster. So this command over here we use to get the details from a particular cluster from the installation. Like let's say currently I only have one Kubernetes cluster, so I don't have to even run this command. But imagine if I have multiple versions or multiple clusters running, then I kind of have to run this command. So it's like if you are working on multiple branches, you need to run git branch and then name of the branch to switch to a particular branch. We're not switching over here. We'll be doing that with a different command, but over here it will just show you which cluster is currently running and where it is right now. Okay. So let's just copy this command. I'm going to paste this and hit enter. Now it retrieved the information because the command has cluster info as the parameter. So it retrieved the cluster information from that particular context. So it says your control plane is running at 63787. This is the port. Then you have core DNS running. We'll have a separate video for core DNS. Don't worry about it. For now, just think this is a service that is used to that provides you DNS functionality within Kubernetes, like a local DNS server. So that's all right. Okay, cluster is running. Now hit clear. Before running this command, make sure you have kubectl command line utility installed because this is really important and we'll be using this particular CLI for the entire CKA series. And this is what we use for any of the Kubernetes cluster interaction, irrespective of where the cluster is hosted, right? It could be EKS, AKS, GKS, or even your VMware bare metal on-premises installation. We use this utility, right? So if you don't have it installed, so you can run kubectl installation Okay, and go to this particular document. It will show you the steps to install kubectl. So let's say kubectl install on Linux. Go ahead and basically you have to just run a curl command to download the binaries, and just verify it and install kubectl with this command. So pretty straightforward instruction, like how you install any package on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. So this is the same thing. Okay, so once you have the kubectl installed, you can run this command kubectl version hyphen hyphen client, and it will show you the version of it. So currently I am using client version 1.2.28.2. So this kubectl version is different from the Kubernetes version. Like ideally you should use the same version as the Kubernetes version, because the cluster I just installed and this kubectl I installed a long time back. So that is why there is a version mismatch between kubectl and the Kubernetes version. Okay. So we have the kubectl installed, we have kind installed, and we have also created a cluster. Now let's interact with the cluster and let's see what it is there in the cluster at the moment, right? So I'm gonna run kubectl get nodes. So this command, as I've said, like all the commands that we are running with the cluster, so any interaction that we do with the cluster, it will be done with the help of kubectl command line. And what it will do, if you remember the previous video, it will send the instructions, or it will reach out to the API server. API server does all the validation and then return the results from the etcd database. So if we do kubectl get nodes, it will first go to API server, validate it, authenticate the request, and then it will go to etcd database to fetch the results, and then it will reply back to you with the nodes that are running, right? So if I hit enter now, will show me that we have one node running. The node name is CK cluster 1 control plane. Okay. Status is ready, and role is control plane, and age and version. Version is 1.29.4, the version that we have used to install the Kubernetes cluster. Right. So we have one node running currently, because we are using a single node cluster at this moment. It does not have separate node for control plane or for worker node. So that is why it only has one node. But this is not what we want, right? We want to have it created in a way that your control plane and worker nodes are kept separately, right? They should not be inside one single VM or one single node. So for that, we'll be creating another cluster with multi-node support. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to my documentation of kind cluster over here. Okay. We have seen the creating cluster, and scroll down. Okay. Scroll down to this section where it says configuring your kind cluster, right? So by default, it creates the cluster with a single node. Control plane and worker node will be inside the same. But with this configuration, you can create the cluster with multiple nodes. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. This is a YAML file. In the next video, we'll be discussing all the prerequisites of YAML and everything about it. But for now, consider this as a configuration file. I'll just copy this. It has a kind, which is cluster. The object type is cluster. It has an API version, right? So this API version will be used to call the internal API. And then we have a field which says nodes. So we have three roles created, one for control plane, one for worker, another one for worker, right? So this will create a multi-node cluster with three nodes. So what I have to do is I have to go back to my directory in the terminal. I'll just open a new file, config.yaml, in the terminal window. Okay, and hit enter and go inside the VI editor with the insert mode by pressing I, and then paste the content over here, whatever we have just copied from the document. Okay, that's it. And then we just close the file with :wq exclamation, hit enter. Now our config file is ready. Now we have to apply these changes. So remember the command that we have used earlier to create the cluster. Let's reuse the same command. Okay, this command. And now just change the name of the cluster to CK cluster 2. Okay, and we'll be using the same image, so you don't have to change the image parameter. But over here we'll be using another additional parameter, which is referring this configuration file. Okay, so the details are provided over here. If you see, like when you create the config file, all right, over here, create the config file. This is how you can refer this file in the command itself. So over here, you provide the details hyphen config and the name of the config file, which is config.yaml, or you can like whatever name you have given. Okay, so this is the entire command now, and I'll hit enter. It will create a new cluster with the name CK cluster 2, and it should have 3 nodes now, one for control plane and 2 for worker nodes, right? So let's have a look at this. Just give it a second. And there are other options which we'll be looking at later on. Like ideally in any production environment, your control plane nodes should also be in the high availability mode. That means instead of having one control plane node, you should have multiple control plane node, at least 3 nodes, right? So this is what we'll be doing as part of this YAML, but this is for the later part. Okay. And there are other options. So documentation is pretty neat for kind cluster. So have a look at that, and we'll be referring that from time to time whenever there is a need. For now, let's see what it did. It used the node image 1.29.4. Then it prepared the nodes. Then it started the control plane. It installed CNI, which is a network plugin. It installed the storage class. It joined the worker nodes. So when you have, let's say, 3 nodes created, one control plane, 2 worker nodes, how do they interact with each other, or how do they know that they are part of the same cluster? So we have to join the worker nodes to the control plane node. We have to set the context between them, right? So that is how they will be part of one single cluster. Okay, so this is why it is a cluster, because it is a group of resources that is there together, right? And this is what we'll be doing now. So again, it is showing you the same output that run this command to get the information from this cluster. Okay, let's do a clear screen. And if you remember the command that we have ran earlier, kubectl get nodes. Okay, so now it is showing, because it switched to the cluster already. Now it is showing we have one control plane and 2 worker nodes. All of them are in ready state. All of them just been created, and all of them are using version 1.29.4. Now there is a tricky situation over here. Now we have 2 cluster created, and which cluster it is using to get the details from, like we don't know, because now that we have just created a new cluster, so it is getting the details from the newer cluster. Like what do I do to get the details from the other cluster, the previous cluster which has only one node? Why it is not showing me that? So for that, we have to use a kubectl command called set context, right? So what you need to do is you need to run this command kubectl config, okay, hyphen set context, and then the name of the context. So name of the context will be kind CK cluster 1. Okay, hit enter. Okay, I might have made some mistake, and you could also make some mistake while, because you don't have to remember all the commands. You cannot remember all the commands, especially if you are a beginner to Kubernetes, right? So what I will suggest doing is you go to this particular website called kubernetes.io/docs and hit enter, right? And over here, you search for something called cheat sheet. Okay, and you will see a Kubernetes cheat sheet. Here it is, second and third document. Select any one of those. Okay, let's go with this one. Okay, so this particular page has all the important commands that you can use with running that you can use to run the cluster. So have a look at that, and now we have referred it. Now we can use it. But what do we do in the exam? Like, how do we remember all the commands in the exam? So I have a good news for you. This CK exam, because this is a complete hands-on exam, and the exam will test you on your knowledge, on your skills, and not on how you remember things or how you remember your commands. For that, there are 2 websites. First is this one, kubernetes.io/docs, and all of its subdomain, plus there is one more Kubernetes .io. Instead of docs, it is blog, I guess. Yeah, and all of its subdomain. So these two websites you can access while giving the exam. So this is available for you. But make sure you practice all the commands enough so that you don't have to refer it every time, because it will just, waste your time in searching for the things and searching for the content that you are looking for, especially the commands. So make sure you remember it. If the command is too long, it is advisable to go to one of these pages and copy the command from there. You can copy paste as well, right? Now this particular page, cheat sheet, this is really important. Make sure you practice this enough. Make sure you know how do you go to that. You go to your kubernetes.io.docs and then search for cheat sheet. The link will be there in first 2-3 results. Okay, so you can find it from here. Now whatever you need to find it, you can just control F from here or command F if you are on Mac. And let's say I need to search for set context. The important thing is you should know what you need to search for, right? For that, why we are doing this hands-on and like this entire series. So hit enter, and here is the command to switch to a namespace. Now we need to switch to a cluster, right? Okay, the reason why it is showing me a different language, because I did not open the English version of it. Somehow it opened the Portuguese version. So let me just change it back to English first. Okay, it's not here. Okay, let me go back. Okay, and open this one. No, not this one. Okay, over here. This is also a French version. Why I don't see the English version of it, I'm not sure. Let's check this one. Vietnamese. What is happening over here? Okay, by default it is English, so it should show. Okay, let's have a look at this. Okay, so the first page is the English version. All right, so yeah, so here are all the commands. So we need to use get context, which will show you all the context available. So let's run this command first. kubectl config get contexts. Right. I'm gonna clear the screen. All right. So now it says we have two context available because we have two running cluster. One is kind ck cluster 1, another one is kind ck cluster 2. And you see a star in front of one of the cluster. That means it is the current context. So we are currently in this particular context. So any command that we run will be returning the result from this particular cluster. Now we need to switch it back to the first cluster. So what we can do is we need to run this command which says use context. So kubectl config use context and then the name of the context. So let me paste it over here, and the cluster name is kind ck cluster 1. Now hit enter, and it says switch to context kind ck cluster 1. Now clear the screen and run the kubectl command again. Kubectl get nodes. I misspelled it. Let me type that again. kubectl get nodes. Okay. Now it is showing one node, which is a control plane node. This is because we have switched to the other cluster. Now, if we run that again with cluster 2 and run the kubectl get nodes, now it is showing me 3 clusters. So this is how you switch between one or more cluster. The reason why I am emphasizing on this fact and why I am, doing that again and again, because this is the first step when you will attempt any of the question in the CK exam. Before every question, before every task, you first have to switch to that context. The command will be provided. This use context command will be provided over there. You have to copy and paste to the terminal. But don't forget this point, because let's say you completed question 1, which uses the context of cluster 1. In the next question, which is question number 2, you have to use cluster 2. And if you keep doing the steps in cluster 2 without using the context, then you won't be able to complete the task. right? And you will keep on looking into again and again why you are not able to complete the task, even if you are doing everything correctly. So that is why it is really important to remember this, that you have to use the context command to switch to the context for which you have to complete the task. It will be there in the question. Make sure you read it through, you read the every question properly, right? So yes, this is our cluster 1, cluster 2, and this is how you set the context. Let me think if we need to cover anything else. Make sure you get yourself familiarized with the Kubernetes documentation, especially these two main domains, kubernetes.io /docs and /blogs, and all of its subdomain will be accessible as well. So yeah, that's all about it, and we'll be looking at all of these in the upcoming videos. So that's it for this video. I hope you were able to install the client cluster and you were able to run all these commands by following along the video. And this is just a warm up. This is just prerequisite setup so that we can run all the tasks, all the commands and everything from the next video onwards. So in the next video, we'll be looking at creating a simple pod. We'll be looking at difference between imperative and declarative ways and basics of YAML, which is a markup language, which is what we'll be using in Kubernetes most of the time to create anything, to make any changes. So we'll be looking at all of these, like what is its format, how do we create it from the scratch, and how do we make sure that it is correct, and everything else about it. Alright, so thank you so much for watching the video. I hope this was helpful to you. If it did, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, colleagues, and support it. And make sure we complete the comments and target for this video and all the videos in this series. And I will see you soon with the next video with the things that we have just discussed briefly. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good day.